During the planning of this event, the issue of Birmingham and the Black Country's relationship with the transatlantic slave trade was raised. This statement is not to take away from the hard-working Black Country women of the time. The trades diminished the lives of the Black Country nascent working class, as well as the commodified lives of those transported from Africa in the most horrific manner. Recent world events have highlighted what many of us have recognised and campaigned for many years, the need for honest reflection about our history. The version of history that we are taught and is often portrayed is one that underrepresents the African Caribbean and Asian community, women, disabled people, LGBT plus people and the working class. It also hides the truth of the wealth accumulated by Britain and the sheer scale and brutality of the slave trade. The question of the Birmingham and Black Country's metalworks relationship with transatlantic slave trade is one that has been raised before, and the truth is we do not have a complete answer. However, there is research out there that highlights how the British industrial sector made huge profits from the slave trade. We've consulted people who have researched the women chainmakers story, and they are unable to give a conclusive answer about slave chain. At the time of the women chainmakers dispute in 1910, slavery in the UK and Europe had been abolished for over 70 years. Slaves in the colonies became free after a period of forced apprenticeship following the Slavery Abolition Act of 1833. Slavery in America continued until 1865. It is a devastating realisation that our ancestors may have produced shackles and chain that enslaved the ancestors of our friends and colleagues. We acknowledge that chains, cuffs, shackles or locks used in the abhorrent slave trade were made in the Black Country. There is evidence of this in the Slavery Museum in Liverpool. It would be wrong and short-sighted to blame one industry alone for a history which connected so many Birmingham and Black Country trades. A more collective acknowledgement and learning about this aspect of British past would be a worthier response to injustices perpetuated by their role within the development of a blood-stained empire. The women we commemorate made small gauge chain from metal rods to the specification of middlemen. It is doubtful they knew what that chain was for. They were uneducated, oppressed women with no rights, who, once organised by Mary Macarthur and the National Federation of Women Workers, went on strike for a living wage. We celebrate the success of those working class women winning a living wage in 1910, 18 years before all women won the right to vote. The women chainmakers of Cradley Heath lived and worked in horrific conditions. One social commentator described Cradley Heath as hell. Whilst the chainmasters would have profited from any historical links to the slave trade, the chainmakers of Cradley Heath did not. With no power or control over their daily lives, we commemorate the women chainmakers' success in organising and standing up to their oppressors who profited from their exploitation. Through organising in trade unions, we challenge exploitation in the workplace, and as trade unionists, we stand with all those that face oppression and subjugation in whatever form. Unity of all oppressed people is what empowers us and is the key to overcoming the most divisive aspects of oppression that so many face today. This is an ongoing project. Nevertheless, a statement of this sort was warranted. This subject is complex and at times unsavoury, but should enable people to have open and transparent discussions and debate.
I recognise that many of you here today will be wondering what right I have, a stranger, to be speaking to you on behalf of the women chainmakers of Cradley Heath. I hope you will come to believe me when I say it is the sense of injustice and unfairness that drives me to use all the resources at my disposal to help improve the circumstances of these women and their families. For making 1 yard of chain, we get 1 penny. That is what the women chainmakers tell us. 1 penny for a yard of chain, struck to last a lifetime. And these women work in conditions that would not be out of place in the Middle Ages, while these conditions are out of place in 1910. We need to remind ourselves that we are now living in the 20th century, one in which we have the opportunity to help each other move forward to a fairer, more civilised way of life. Not for the few, but for all. It's not the God-given prerogative of those born to wealth and privilege, of whose number I count myself one, to live comfortably off the backs of others such as yourselves. And I feel it is only right and fair that I use my accident of privilege to assist and support these cradly women in their struggle for better rates of pay. You know, my first glimpse of Cradley Heath was on a dark November afternoon. As my train drew into Cradley Heath station, I looked down along the rows of long, low sheds. The red glows of the forge fires and the dim shadows of the toiling workers put me in mind of some Middle Ages torture chamber, the likes of which you will only see in Madame Tussauds in London. Women of all ages were at work in those forges, their children around their feet, and they had been since 7 o'clock that morning, a mere 12-hour day. To those of you who know little or nothing of the chain-making trade and the women that work in it, let me tell you more. The oldest worker I have spoken with is 79 years of age. Yes, 79 years of age. And she has worked at the forge since she was a child of 10. Now her children and her children's children are all slaves of the forge. Remember, 1 penny for a yard of chain from 7 in the morning until 7 each evening. And then, at the end of a long, long working week, our chainmaker can expect to earn between 5 and 8 shillings, on which she must feed, clothe and house her family. Those women and their children earn barely enough to keep starvation at bay. Indeed, it is said that none of the chainmakers' houses need larders, for they all live hand to mouth. And so the hopeless, despairing struggle for existence goes on, unless we gather together our strength and courage and go forward as one. Things do not have to remain so just because they've been so. There are good men amongst the employers and manufacturers, and there are misguided men. Those who are truly gentlemen will see our struggle for a fair rate of pay as a just and realistic one. Divided we can do nothing, but together we are mighty and as strong as the chain you make. Withdraw your labour, lay down your tools, let the fires in your forges grow cold. And this way you will see for yourselves how valued is your trade. Oh yes, the employers have stockpiled cheap chain at your expense, but it will not be long before they're wondering who's going to make the next lot. Already 800 of you cradly women have downed tools, and in doing so you have risen up against injustice for the future of your industry and your children. Those women are preparing to march the streets as we speak. They will march for freedom and the right to earn twopence halfpenny an hour. Many of you women know full well that you've already been duped by underhand means. The right to a minimum wage has already been agreed by the manufacturers. This call for action is to support all those women who've had little or no schooling and have fixed their marks on the so-called petitions of your employers. In effect, you've given away your right to the minimum wage. So join with us. Join the National Federation of Women Workers. March with us for freedom and the rights. And I give you my word, not one of you will go hungry. For freedom and the right.
Thank you and good morning and welcome to our first virtual Women's Chainmakers Festival, the only trade union festival in the UK to recognise the united power of women. Please note at the opening of this festival, a statement was made regarding slavery. Any questions you have for our panel, please put in the question box, not the chat box, with your name and which union you are representing, if any. Thank you. Please ensure that throughout this festival that you treat people with kindness, with respect and dignity, and the behaviour code is situated in the comments section. Please also note that the festival will be recorded. Now it's my great pleasure to introduce the following speakers. Nikki Downs from the NEU, Zara Sultana, MP for Coventry South, Elena Smith, ex-MP for Wolverhampton South West and previous TUC Midlands Chair, Maureen Scott-Douglas, Women's Officer for Unite the Union, Sarah James, GMB, Equalities and Lead Women's Officer. And it's my greatest pleasure also to introduce and welcome Louise Regan, who's currently our chair at Midlands TUC. I'm now going to ask the first two panelists to briefly introduce themselves, and then we'll hand over to do some question and answer. So the first panelist, it's my great pleasure to introduce to you, is Nikki Downs from the NEU. Thank you, Nikki. Hello, Nikki.
Hi, I can't see myself, so I don't know whether I'm actually on or not. So
yes, yes, you're on, Nikki. Yeah. Okay, thank you. Yes.
It's really difficult when you can't see what's happening. Hi, yeah, I'm Nikki Downs, and I'm a member of the executive of the National Education Union and a district and branch secretary in Coventry. And I'm actually here on my narrowboat because I thought that was really apt, considering obviously narrowboats were used to carry chain across the Midlands and to wider places. So I thought it was quite a nice idea to do that. And I've also got chain on the boat. Actually, my ropes are connected to the chain, so it's connected to the Armco. So, you know, it's a real privilege to be here. And I think the festival has developed, hasn't it, as a community festival over the years. And it's such a pity we're not in Cradley Heath on the high street as we would normally be.
Okay, thank you and welcome, Nikki. I'd also like to welcome Zara Sultana, MP. Zara, if you'd like to introduce yourself, please.
Of course. Hi, everyone. My name is Zara Sultana. I'm the Labour Member of Parliament for Coventry South. And it's a real honour to join this incredible panel this morning. And I'm really interested in the conversations that we're about to have around the history of the chain makers, and also you know, how the legacies of this historic moment where Mary Macarthur and others fought for the rights that we have today.
Okay, thank you. It's now open for any questions. So if there is anybody would like to pass any questions on, please. Okay, no current questions. So what I'm going to do is introduce the next three speakers, and we're then waiting for some questions to come through. So my next three speakers, it's my great pleasure to introduce my friend Elena Smith, previous MP at Wolverhampton South West. Helena, are you there, please?
I am. Can you hear me?
I can hear you. Good morning. Really lovely to see you. Yeah.
Thank you. Oh, thank you for inviting me to do this. I'm highly honoured by it. It's kind of like, feels like old times in a way, but not quite. A bit more virtual old times. Yes, I was, as we all know, we were party to getting the Cradley Heath, well, getting the women's chain makers to actually be acknowledged, because for a long time it wasn't, and we actually got them at the Black Country used to do, remember the ones that used to have the big stage at the Black Country Dudley Museum? Amazing. And I think when it moved to Cradley Heath it was the right thing. I don't think we didn't have the choice then, did we, really? But actually, when you think about it, it was the right thing to do, because that's where it started, and that's where we should be celebrating it as well. And especially around Black Country itself, which included Wolverhampton, which I was an MP for. I think the history of that needed to be known more and taught in the schools, you know, because not many people are aware of the chainmakers women. So yeah, I'm really delighted to be here and in a virtual way, and thank you for inviting me.
Thank you. I've had some questions come through. I also want to address another housekeeping issue. Unfortunately, we don't have Donna Mills with us today, but I'm going to ask the three panelists some questions that have come through before I introduce the other two panelists. The first question is, the slavery statement, which was read out at the beginning, obviously addressed certain issues of many British industries being built on the suffering and exploitation of slaves. As a country, how can we best address this without marginalising any sections of society?
I'll start with that, I don't mind.
Okay,
so
Zara,
I think the statement at the beginning of the event was really powerful, and I believe that it's really important that we investigate and interrogate and understand our history, because history can often be uncomfortable, but unless we grapple with it, we fail to understand the impact it has today. And that's also important because the values of equality and solidarity must be extended to all. And recently we've seen this need to understand our history brought to the surface with Black Lives Matter protests, where demonstrators toppled the statue of Edward Colston. And what they did in that moment was educate more people than that statue ever had. And this is something that we just need across society, but including the labour movement, because it's not being taught in our schools, which is a campaign that I know that the NEU is campaigning on, and so many other campaigners, because these legacies are still with us, and we can't understand racism in today's 21st century Britain without understanding the history in which it comes from. So I think it's about asking the question, how did this country accumulate the wealth that it has, making it the 6th richest country in the world compared to other countries which have been essentially pillaged, and on whose backs were those riches made? And I think it's about the solidarity links as well, because the women who were chain makers were also exploited by the same system, but they were also being used to make this country essentially make profit off of plantations and the slave trade. So I think it's just about reckoning with this history and also showing solidarity with people who experience racism today, and just being aware of those connections.
Okay, Zara, obviously as a new MP, and obviously, you know, you've become a new MP at the beginning of COVID and all the situation where regarding Black Lives Matter, etc. Is there anything you want to add about how you feel you can empower women?
So being an MP in this period of time has been quite the roller coaster. I've spent more months under lockdown restrictions than I have not in lockdown restrictions. And I think the conversation that we're having around race at the moment is really important. And it's because when we look at things like the impact of COVID on minority ethnic, Black, Asian, and minority ethnic people, we see a disproportionate impact. When we look at precarious work and 0 hours contracts, of course, these disproportionately affect women, but also Black, Asian, and minority ethnic people. And we see how in health outcomes and education outcomes, there is also that disproportionate impact. So I think it's being, as an MP for me, it's about highlighting these statistics, but also looking at solutions. And one of the things that I did very early on was highlight the impact on NHS workers, where we saw high levels of BAME people pass away, and people were tweeting me, "Are you accusing COVID-19 of being racist?" And that wasn't what I was doing at all. I was highlighting the fact that COVID-19 is shining a light on existing inequalities, the way it's impacting disadvantaged groups, essentially. So as an MP, for me, it's about fighting for sick pay, which will benefit everyone, including those right at the bottom of the economic ladder, essentially. It's about fighting for public services that are well funded, because we all benefit, especially people who are the most vulnerable, and also migrants' rights. I think when we look at the fact that we have an NHS surcharge, when we look at the fact that people are scared to access public services because they could get deported, and the fact that we haven't learned, well, the government hasn't learned from the Windrush scandal, has not implemented anything from the lessons learned review. It just gives me a lot of work to do, work that I'm very privileged to do, but just shows that we have a long way to go when it comes to fighting for a society that is equal and just.
Okay, thank you, Zara. Eleanor, I understand that you became the MP, which was Enoch Powell's seat, is that correct? Yeah,
Yes.
okay. And obviously you've done a hell of a lot of work on all these different issues. Is there anything you would like to add to this, please?
I think one of the things that we must recognise that how racism has started, and let's bring the Cradley Heath women's chainmakers. Again, you feel that it's oppressions. It's the oppression. It's the institution that creates the issues, the problems, the way that they because I mean, I noticed that Mary Macarthur used the word slaved in her speech, because those women were very much like slave workers. And yet that never comes in any of the history books, even in your own, when they're talking about British history. They never really talk about what the actual people, the working class people, actually went through. For me, that has to be a joint thing, because we need to recognise that racism, we also need to recognise how the oppressed, how the I would say the authorities oppress people as well, you know, as well as taking up the mantle for racism. And what I like about the Black Lives Matter now, it's that the conversation is going on that bit level higher. When I was young, we had the anti-racist movement, but we only specifically talked about areas such as probably in football or the police, but we never actually touched the other institution, which is a broader one, which is in politics, which is in education, and those institutions which created racism, and we never tackled that. I feel with the Black Lives movement now, they are beginning to see that. And the younger generation, and then they use the word woke, and I love that. It's about actually identifying now that actually the things that you were doing, this is the effects that it has. And for me, I can see that with the joint as well, because it's, you know, I can see the young white people as well as middle-aged white people recognizing actually that's right, we do see what we're doing. Actually, we need to understand what we're doing, and I feel there's a joint thing that if you understand how we were oppressed, then you'd probably see how you were oppressed as well, you know, because this thing is for me, it's bigger, and in order for us to come together and understand it, we can't separate it, we must bring it together. And there's that link. For me, it's the oppressed women in the Cradley Heath. The women were there working under slave conditions by the masters who were in control. And that's the thing, the masters who were always in control. And we have to see that link. That's what I wanted. I would like Cradley Heath to identify with those women in the Black country and say, look, this is what they did. They had all that money. They used us, basically, that's what they did, to oppress us, not to give us any more, but to keep us down. And that's what racism does. What it does, it oppresses people and keeps them down.
Okay, thank you, Eleanor. Very, very passionate there. I've also got an education question, and here I'm going to bring in Nikki Downs, and then I'll also bring in Louise Regan, if that's all right as well, because I know, Louise, you've done so much work with the NEU. So the question here is, what can be done to reclaim the education curriculum to represent and engage with all our pupils and communities? So I'll start with Nikki and then bring in Louise. Thank you.
Thanks. I mean, it's a really good question, and it's something that's at the top of our agenda at the moment. What we don't want when we return fully to school is for things to go back to how they were. We want better. And it's really frightening, I think, that we've had a statement saying that what was going to happen in September is a Victorian curriculum with children staring at the front in rows, and a very narrow curriculum, because actually what the NEU and other education unions are fighting for is to decolonise the curriculum, to make it more relevant to all of our children that we teach. And that's, you know, that's been happening before Black Lives Matter, but Black Lives Matter, I think, has really put that to the front of the agenda. And many of our local districts have had meetings on that, and are doing a lot of work with teachers in terms of discussing what the issues are, and having a curriculum that is wide and reflects all of Black history, and isn't about a Black History Month. We need to move away from that, because it involves every area of the curriculum, and it involves you know, the stories that we're telling today. And I think it's really important. There was some really, you know, for the statement to have been said earlier, because actually we need to teach about this as well. We need to teach about the women of Cradley Heath. We need to teach about how struggle can bring about change. And as Eleanor really brilliantly said, beautifully said, women were at the bottom rung and are exploited by the system. And at that point, they were forced to work for a pittance. And they had to do it to feed their children. Otherwise, their families would have had nothing to eat. They had to work with their children alongside them, and they were working. And you know, they went into labour while they were working, and then went back to work the next day, or they'd have lost their jobs. So, you know, these are the things that we need to teach children. But we also need to teach about Mary Macarthur, about the union, and about how actually through struggle they managed to win better working conditions.
Thank you. Thank you. Good morning, Louise. I can see you're travelling there somewhere. So,
Morning,
good morning. Thank you for joining us. I'm fine.
No,
Thank you for
welcome.
joining us. Yeah.
You're welcome. I mean, you know, Nikki has covered a lot of stuff there, but I think, you know, we have done a lot of work as a union. It is very high on our agenda. We've produced our anti-racist charter, which was launched last week. And we know educators up and down the country are really, really, you know, engaged with this. They want a different sort of curriculum for our children and young people. And we, you know, we have a duty to do that, really. I suppose the other thing I wanted to say is, I think it's also really important that we go back to a system of our teacher training and education worker training containing work around this. We should be taught about how to, you know, teach an anti-racist curriculum, an anti-sexist curriculum, an anti-homophobic curriculum. Educators need support in their training so that they can do that. But we need ongoing support, and actually everybody working in the education system needs to be trained around these issues, because they come up all the time. And people need to know how to tackle them, how to intervene, how to support children and young people in these issues. So I, you know, as I say, I think Nikki has done, you know, covered what we're doing. We are really, you know, we're really keen to carry on promoting this work, and we've got lots of things coming out, and we will be pushing really hard for a different sort of curriculum in September.
Thank you for that, Louise. Right, next question. The question is, how can we grow awareness of the chainmakers dispute amongst the wider labour movement? Who would like to come in on that? Zara?
Sure. I just want to quickly touch on the decolonising the curriculum point, because I think it's beyond just you know, primary and secondary school education. At university, as someone who studied international relations, and friends who studied English literature and other courses, the curriculum was really disappointing. And I think the conversation also has to expand beyond the curriculum to how many Black teachers do we have, who is in our senior management at schools, and I think also the crisis within higher education where it is marketized and it is about making profit. I think there's a whole wider conversation there. But on this point about how we can educate people about the struggles that were fought in the Black country and in Cradley Heath specifically, I think this is a really important event, and it happens every year, and I wish more people were aware of it and took part. But I believe it just has to be something that unions who are already committed. I think it just has to be part of that annual calendar where every year, you know, we're all ready for Durham Miners Gala every year. And I feel this has to be another one of those things in the labour movement calendar that everyone promotes and supports and takes part in. And I think this is a really important way where it's digital and accessible. In a way, we can promote this and make sure that next year, when hopefully it is a physical event in Cradley Heath, that more people will be joining us. But I think social media plays a big part, and general conversations with our trade union comrades.
Okay, thank you. Eleanor?
Yeah, I agree with Sarah, absolutely. It should be in the national TUC's calendar. I'm not sure whether it is. And exactly as Sarah said, when they've got the Durham Miners Marching Festival, they celebrate that. That's what we should, I mean, that's what we intended to do anyway. That's what we wanted to do from the beginning when we started this campaign. And how many years on, we're still doing it, but it can be done. Another the difference is, as Zara said, this is now going out more widely. It's on the social media. So other people that have never heard of it will be listening to it. So hopefully we'll kind of feel, actually, what is this about? And get more interest in it. I agree with the previous speaker, I'm sorry, but in regards to the curriculum, when you're looking at the curriculum, you ought to look at that as well, because I always think the curriculum was like Downton Abbey type of curriculum. It only talked about the nice things of what happened in the past and the odd bit of bad things that happened, you know, like boys going up chimneys, children and things like that. But actually, that actually happened. The workhouse, more emphasis should be made on that. And this is the way that they had treated working class people within their own society. And I just feel that that's never really taught. It's brushed under, it's covered over, you know, just like how they've covered over the slave trade. For me, if you're really going to do anything, you really talk about the actual history of what the majority went through, how they were exploited in the same way that we were exploited over in the Africa and the Caribbean, and to some extent in America as well, but I won't talk about that because that's another level. But, you know, and I just think the real history of what should be taught in the schools, and maybe people will, you know, if you grow up thinking, well, actually, that was my foreparents that was like that. And maybe we look and see, I mean, I'm being political here, but, you know, to see how the trade union came about, the reason why the trade union came about, and the reason why we need a trade union now even more so. That has to come in. At one time, we were going in the schools to talk about trade unions because our youngsters didn't even know what a trade union was. All that needs to be brought in, and you will help towards, for me, the equality for everybody.
Thank you, Eleanor, as passionate as always. Before I bring in the next questions, I'm going to introduce our next two speakers, panellists, who are going to say a little bit about themselves. So I'm going to start with Maureen Scott-Douglas, who represents Unite the Union, who's the Women's Officer. Are you there, Maureen, please? Hello?
Yes, I'm here.
Hello, Maureen. Good morning. Would you like to introduce yourself? Nice to see you. Thank you.
Thank you. Good day, everyone. I'm Maureen Scott-Douglas, the West Midlands Women and Equalities Officer for Unite. It's my pleasure today representing Unite. When I was given the theme of the event, I had a lot of thoughts about what to talk about. Initially, I was going to talk about the domestic violence and organisations that people can link to during lockdown. I was also thinking about Black Lives Matter and so on and so forth. And it's really apt that the speech that took place at the beginning of this event represented some of what I really wanted to speak about. As we know, in 1910, women of Cradley Heath organised around low pay, and with the support of Mary Macarthur, won their disputes. But today I want to talk about a couple of other things which happened in 1910. This was the year Iana Phillips was born. Iana was a woman born in a village in St. Thomas, Jamaica. At the age of 21, she became pregnant and was evicted from her home by her devout Christian parents. She was unmarried. She struggled as a single parent and the relationship did not work. And a couple of years later, she met another man and again fell pregnant. This man was not interested in her pregnancy, but his parents gave her accommodation and she was able to raise her two daughters, Carmen and my mother, Lynn. Years later, she had another child. She continued to struggle as a single parent. During the time, she met someone who wanted to marry her. However, this man was not interested in her daughters having an education. He wanted her daughters to work the land. She rejected that man because she wanted her daughters to have an education and she wanted them to have a better life and a career or a profession. She worked as a domestic servant in a great house. This was a former house of a slave owner. She did not earn much money, but always came home and told her daughters about English recipes and got them prepared for life and said, if you ever travel to England, these are the sort of things that you may end up cooking. I was informed that she was a tenacious and strong woman who single-handedly project managed the building of her own house. Later on, she got married and lived happily ever after with her husband. Today, I remember her bravery and tenacity and how, as a single parent, she held it together to raise her daughters. The other event that took place in 1910 was the birth of my other grandmother, Hilda Watson. She was born into somebody else's relationship. However, she was acknowledged and supported by her father. At a young age, she started a little business as a shopkeeper. She married young and had a lot of children. Her first child joined the RAF and came to England to support the Second World War. After he left Britain, he decided to leave Britain because of racism. He said it wasn't a place for him. And he went back to Jamaica and then he went to America where he settled. My grandmother went to America to work as a migrant labourer in the care profession as a care assistant. So she used to travel to and from America and she used that money to support her family. Mm-hmm. Today, we're looking at forging new links, and what I've done is forged new links with my past. In 1910, we had the women in Cradley Heath struggling, but that was the year both my grandparents, both my grandmothers were born, and they struggled too. Today we're struggling with mental health, with domestic violence, with our education, with our employment, and we have our trade unions who are supporting us. We also have other organisations who support us. Today, I remember Iana Phillips, Hilda Watson, and the women of Cradley, and salute you all. Thank you.
Thank you, Maureen. That was excellent. Thank you. Thank you. I'm now going to bring in Sarah James before we address any more questions. Good morning, Sarah, and nice to see you've got a beautiful photograph in the background, and I think that's of the chain makers, if I can see correctly. Yes. So good morning. Sarah is GMB, and she's also Lead Equalities and Lead Women's Officer. So Sarah, if you'd like to tell us something about yourself, please.
Yeah, Thanks, Catherine. I'd just like to say absolutely fantastic. Well done to everyone who's already spoken. It's a fantastic idea to bring the chainmakers online. I mean, back in the day, Mary Macarthur was very media savvy. She knew that by using the media of her day, so back in the early 1900s, she would be able to promote the cause of the chainmaking women by putting those workers' stories at the forefront of the struggle. And I think that's really, really important for today, that we also make sure that it's the workers' voices who are heard when we're talking about the struggles in the workplace. And I'm sure she would be very, very proud looking down on us today that we're using the technology and the media of our day, no matter what the blocks are that are put in front of us and the barriers, to ensure that this festival still goes ahead. So I wanted to say a quick thank you to the organisers, to the NEU for hosting this meeting, and also to the TUC Midlands as well for continuing to push. I will just correct you just very, very slightly, Catherine. Although I am the lead, GMB's National Equality Lead for Women, I'm not actually an officer. So I'm a lay activist working. It's absolutely fine. I just wanted to make sure that that was correct. So yeah, I work and live in Sandwell. I've grown up in Sandwell, lived here all of my life. And I'm embarrassed to admit that until I became involved in the trade union movement 12 years ago, I'd never heard of Mary Macarthur, never heard of the Cradley Heath Chainmakers. And I've got family that are from Cradley, so potentially I could have some of my ancestors that were those chainmaking women working in those forges, working in their backyards. And I think going back to the point that was made earlier on about the education, this is an all too familiar comment that I hear from my peers and from people that I talk to about the chainmakers. So I definitely think that it's something that, for this specific moment, for our talking about the Cradley Heath Chainmakers, that it is definitely something that we need to be talking about, pushing locally, regionally, and as Elena has said as well, pushing it nationally to ensure that these women chainmakers are not forgotten and what they achieved. And as you said earlier on, it was 18 years before women won their fight for the right to vote. I know people talk about 1918 being a pivotal moment, but it was actually 1928 before women all won the fight for equal rights in terms of men and voting. So for women to put down their tools, go out on strike for 10 weeks at a time when they couldn't even vote, and win that right to a minimum wage is just so important, and we should never ever forget it.
Okay, thank you, Sarah. That brings me on quite nicely to the next question. Why do you think the chainmakers are less recognised in trade union history? And I think that's an excellent question, because when we mention Durham, everybody knows about Durham Miners Gala, they know about Toll Puddle, etc. But why do you think sometimes people aren't aware or recognise the chainmakers? Who would like to start with that question, please? Elena?
Yeah,
thank
you.
you.
Quite obvious, because they're women. You know, anything that women did was not seen as significant. You know, yes, we've got the chain makers and the matchsticks women, but the chain makers were the ones that we should be celebrating in the same par as the Durham miners. But again, it's because we're women, and women were even seen as equal anyway. And it was just fighting for, even though it was fighting for the women to be able to feed their family, because they were always responsible for them. I think, if you think back in 1910, oh, can you hear me? Because I can hear feedback. No, okay. So if you know, you think about way back how, you know, they were talking about emancipation and talking about women having the rights. I think for me, and I'm sure somebody else will come back on this, that it was definitely, it's because it was a women's movement and it wasn't a man. Had it been a men, I reckon we would be, if it was Cradley Heath men that was fighting for the rights, that would be recognised. But because it's women, that's how it is. But we as women have to continue to do it. We've got that role, we've got that job, we've got to do it, and we will continue to do it.
Okay, thank you for that. Would anybody like to come in on that question, please? Maureen, and then Sarah. Maureen?
Yes, I'd just like to echo some of what Eleanor was saying. The Black Country has always been made up of industry, and Cradley Heath is not a place that sort of stands out. It's quite easy for a place like Cradley Heath to be forgotten. However, as trade unionists, we do remember Mary Macarthur and we do remember the chain makers. And each year we've been having our festival. It's about that information going further afield. And I think today is a really good way in which, because people can join interactively, so that message is getting out. But within the Black Country, we have got, I know there's a hospital ward, the Mental Health Trust, which is named after Mary Macarthur. We've got the Mary Macarthur Gardens. The chain makers are spoken about, and there are publications. It's just not wide enough. Thank you.
Thank you. Sarah?
Yeah, I think there was a very powerful quote that Mary said, and I'll just paraphrase it. Women are unorganised because they're badly paid, and poorly paid because they are unorganised. And I think that kind of summarises why it's not celebrated, why the chain making women. And I think there was a comment in the questions box as well in the chat bar about the Ford Dagenham workers as well. It's not widely known. We can go into schools and we hear about kings and queens and world wars, which rightly so, we need to learn about world wars. But we hear about all the upper class and we learn about how many wives Henry VIII had, but we never learn about our own history, because power is not, knowledge is power. And if we're educated, we're empowered and we're engaged, we'll be going out and we'll be standing up and fighting for our rights. And I think, yes, it's women's history, but on a more broader term, I think just working class history as a whole isn't spoken about, and we don't learn enough about it. We've been talking a lot about oppression. As soon as you've got knowledge and you know that if you stand together, and I know Mary spoke about the bundle of stick stories, if you're a single twig, you'll be easily bent or broken to the will of your employer. If you are together and united and solid, it's going to be very, very hard to break it down. And I think we're still talking about those lessons from the 1900s, from 1910 and previously, because people think that the chain makers was Mary Macarthur came in, swept these women up in a 10-week strike and left. But it wasn't. Mary had been trying to organise women in the super sweated industries for many, many years. And we see these same struggles now in the gig economy, in precarious employment. I mean, today, the hospitality industry is reopening. How many people have been forced back into work without safe practices in place, without being paid the proper wage? And I'm really, really concerned that going forward, that if we do not organise these women workers, but also all workers in these industries, that we're going to be having these same fights and talking about these same battles when we remember the pandemic, the COVID 2020 pandemic, in 100 years' time, just like we're now talking about the chain maker strike of 1910. So I think, to wrap it up loosely, it is, they don't want us to know, the people who give us the information.
Okay, thank you. I'm going to ask this question to Zara and to Nikki, but if either of you want to come in as well, if any of you want to come in as well, that's great. History is full of oppression of women and ethnic minorities, but the Women Chainmakers Festival is a success story. Education is the key to build for the future, as many have said, but how else can we use our history to improve the lives of those who are oppressed today? I'll start with Sarah.
Sorry, I was just waiting to be unmuted. I think the history of the trade union movement couldn't be more relevant than it is now. We're seeing the trade unions like the NEU, who fought back against the government's plans to reopen schools before it was safe to do so and forced them to retreat. We're seeing it with Unite Now, fighting for British Airways staff who are being threatened with redundancy, and then being rehired on worse terms and conditions. So the trade union movement could have been more relevant than now, but of course there is an important job of connecting those struggles with the struggles of the past, like the chain makers. And one thing in particular I want to just refer to is the conversations around the 4-day working week, which some people are laughing off and thinking, you know, this is impossible. But that's because we were never taught about how we won the weekend. We were never taught about how we won the minimum wage. We were never taught about how we won sick pay and paternity and maternity pay. And I think as we look at the climate crisis, and as we look at how we need to really reconfigure how we work and how we're completely living unhealthy lives in terms of that work-life balance, where UK workers work more hours than European workers, we have less holidays than European workers. I think it's a really important time to connect those historic fights and say that actually very little has changed, you know, as trade union rights have been clamped down on, especially since Thatcher, and you know, they haven't actually been improved. And of course Jeremy Corbyn and that manifesto in 2019 was a huge opportunity to change that. Unfortunately, we weren't able to make that happen. But I think this moment, with the light that coronavirus shines on how unequal our economy is, how unequal our society is, it's a really important opportunity to connect those historic struggles and platform those voices that have been marginalized, such as the chain makers, but also other fights across the country, such as the Leicester strikes, Dagenham. There's so many that we can draw upon to highlight those voices of women, of working class people.
Okay, thank you. Nikki, is there anything you'd like to add there?
Oops. Yeah, sorry, it took me a minute. Absolutely, that as well. And I think when we're teaching a curriculum, it needs to know that struggle you can win. When you struggle, you can win. And it's not just the chain makers. There are other areas as well that we can bring in, like Runwit, like Dagenham workers as well, and show that actually women, when they fight together, they can beat the oppression that they're facing, and they can win change. And what's been, I don't want to say a positive of COVID, because that makes it sound like there is something good out of it, but there is in a way, because what we've seen in the NEU is a huge upsurge in membership. But even more importantly, we've seen many more reps, and many of those reps are young women, and they are fighting in the workplace and making victories on a daily basis. Sarah talked about schools opening later, and that was the result of our reps on the ground. Without them, we wouldn't have been able to do that. Even opening a week later meant the children were safer because the infection rate will have fallen. And it's those things that we need to be talking about. We need to be talking about unions in schools. We need to be talking about struggle in schools. Our history, when we're talking about it, it can't just be, I think Elena said it really well, about where people lose, where, you know, where the working class are downtrodden. It's got to show that there is a way to fight, and that actually when you fight, you can win.
Okay, thank you, Nikki. Right, the next question is open to all of our panelists. Can you please indicate if you would like to address this question? Mary Macarthur used innovative communication and organisation techniques to reach people. What lessons are there for us to build wider coalitions to deliver lasting change today? Any of the panelists? Sarah? Hello, Sarah. Yes, thank you.
Yeah, I think that's a really, really good question about how we can utilise the technologies that we've got around us, how we can deliver those changes. I mean, I know for my union in particular, we've been hosting lots and lots of webinars. We've been hosting right from the beginning of COVID right through to even this week and ongoing webinars, Zoom meetings, Facebook Live videos to engage with workers that necessarily wouldn't know about trade unions, and explaining what a trade union is, why it's so important for people to be involved in one. And it kind of goes back to what I was saying earlier. I mean, we see people in our own organising areas, the struggles faced by working people, whether it be fighting against low pay, rallying members to stand up to bosses over health and safety issues. I mean, I did that within an area that I work in a couple of weeks ago, just to give a kind of an anecdote. And within a week, the employer had changed their working practices, had engaged with the staff, and it really gave a confidence boost to those workers, who were all predominantly all women as well. And it stops employers from trying to individualise the workforce. And I think the main lessons that Mary can teach us going forward, and would base the form of any union organising, but any kind of organising of any event. So one, it's engaging with people. So Mary was a great speaker and knew how to talk to workers and to see the benefits of unions. And she also knew how to talk to employers and those she needed to gather support from. So secondly, educating people, which we've already spoken quite a lot of. If we look back at the chainmakers, for instance, many of those women that Mary organised couldn't read or write. Today, many of us do have that privilege of knowing how to read and write, but so many of us do not know our rights at work, and that education is so powerful, as already been said and echoed by the rest of the panel. And thirdly, and I think this is the most important thing as any trade unionist can going forward, is to empower people. So it was said that Mary gave women, through a union, the tools to make things better for themselves. And I think that's really important, that leadership isn't always about standing at the front, having the loudest voice, but helping others to find their own. And I think those three key points, if we keep those in our minds when we go back to our workplaces, Zara, when you go back to the Commons, I think it's really, really important that we remember to engage with people, educate and empower them. And by those three things, workers will be able to organise themselves, spread the message of unions, and also to be able to challenge those bad practices and bad employers.
Thank you very much, Sarah. Would anybody else like to address that question? Maureen. Thank you.
Okay. I'd just like to say that just as Mary reached out to workers, as a union, we have 20+ sectors, which we have been doing a lot of work during lockdown. We've been doing a lot of work around manufacturing and have produced some documentation and having a conference around manufacturing matters. There's going to be a lot of job losses, and it's important that unions are still there for the members. We cannot prevent those job losses, but we can support the members who lose their jobs. We've got a lot of documentation and support for people going through redundancy, including some training for our representatives. We've also got and have been involved in the hospitality industry, where we've been working with the government to get the pubs, hotels, etc. open up, and ensuring that our members are safe whilst they're working. So the unions are doing a lot of work, and it is about reaching out to our members. It would be quite easy during lockdown to sit back and relax and say, well, we're all in this situation. But unions have been working harder than ever and working with all sectors to ensure that people can get back to work, job losses are minimum, and there is support to those people who do lose their jobs.
Thank you, Maureen. Right, the next question would like to be addressed to Eleanor. How did Mary Macarthur build confidence and leadership among women chainmakers in lead up to the strike? Hello, Eleanor, I can't hear you at the moment. Can we unmute Eleanor, please?
Sorry.
There you are, thank you.
Oh, yeah.
Did you get the question?
Yeah, could you just do the question again? Sorry, because it was...
Yeah. How did Mary Macarthur build confidence and leadership among women chainmakers in the lead up to the strike?
Mm-hmm. I think it's about gaining the trust. One of the things that I felt that I had to do when I was an MP, and I, was, and not only as an MP, but also as a trade union person as well, And that was to go in and gain the trust, make them feel that they can trust you. And I really believe that Mary Macarthur did that. She went in and said to other people, I'm going to try, because what the thing is about try, and get you a better working condition, get you that pay rise that you need. But in order to do that, I would imagine she would have said to them, I'm also going to need your help, because this is not something you can do on your own. And one of the campaigns that I ran in Wolverhampton as an MP was to save a GP from closing down. But the one thing that I did, I said, it isn't just about me that can do it. It's also about yourselves as well. I can be your voice, but I need to know that you are there, and that all I'm doing is being the voice for you, but you're there behind me. And that's the thing. As a trade union, you put your head above the parrot all the time, don't you? But the one thing you need to also be able to have is to know that you've got people behind you. And in order to have that, you need that sense that they can trust you. And I think that's the main thing for me. And I believe that Mary Macarthur would have gone in there. She would have gained their trust so that they felt confident that she is speaking for them. And it's not about her. And it's not about, you know, what I'm going to do and is it going to make me bigger? No, it's about wanting to get your rights and for you to continue to get that rights once I'm dead and gone, as the word saying.
Thank you, Eleanor. Would anyone else like to come in on that question? Okay, thank you. Next question, and it's for all of our panelists. History is full of oppression of, I teach history at a secondary school in Coventry, and I think we do a pretty good job with diversity in our curriculum. However, I also think we have room for improvement. If the panel could include one thing on the curriculum, what would it be? So how could you improve the curriculum? Just one thing, all of you. Can I start with Nikki? Thank you, Nikki. Can we mute Nikki, please?
Oh, that's so hard. Just one thing.
Just one thing.
Well, let's start with the chain makers then. Let's get them on the curriculum.
Okay, yeah, excellent. Yeah, chain makers on the history curriculum. Awesome. Sarah? One thing on the curriculum you would add.
So I think my answer will be tailored to the fact that it's a school in Coventry, and I think that the fact that we had the founding of the Indian Workers Association, which was very militant and fought for you know, workers' rights, but also the history of two-tone, the history of fighting racism. I think Coventry plays such a central role in all of that, and also you know, as well as people will often refer to Coventry's role during, you know, World War II and as a city of peace and reconciliation. But I think when it comes to fighting for workers' rights, fighting racism, these are ways to make people, especially young people, feel like they have a stake, that they are part of a city that's so exciting and has, you know, been a leader in so many of these fights. And I think that's a form of empowering, and I think that it has transformative potential.
Okay, thank you. Eleanor? Eleanor, can we unmute Eleanor, please? Okay, thank you.
I just think if we could have on the curriculum a proper history about working class, for me, the struggles that they have and what they've achieved. I think if it'd be great if the TUC could develop a book on history and it being taught in the school. That's because the TUC has got so much that they could put in that, you know, the histories and the struggles, you know, you have it there as well as reference as well. You know, for me, that would be a good thing. TUC, get together and get a history book about how the TUC came about and get it on the curriculum.
Fabulous. I'm sure you can help me write it. Okay, Maureen. Hello, Maureen. Can we unmute Maureen to answer that question, please?
Yes. My thing would be about Black history and also other people's histories. I think in schools, from what I remember, history used to be quite broad. I didn't know much about what else was happening around the world, around Africa, around the Caribbean and so on. So I think history should be more inclusive.
Okay, thank you. Sarah. Sarah? Hello? Can we unmute Sarah, please? Thank you.
Thank you. I was waiting to be unmuted. I think everyone's kind of covered everything. What I would say and add to that is on the curriculum, I think definitely employment rights people need to know, and they need to know the links for how to join a union and what a trade union is. So that's what I would add onto the curriculum.
Okay, thank you. Thank you. I'm just going to ask you, all the panelists, if there's something else you would like to add. Obviously, we need to move on to the victory video. So I'm going to start with you, Nikki. Is there anything this morning? There's a lot more questions come in, and I could carry on this for another hour, but obviously I've got to abide by the agenda. But is there anything, Nikki, you would like to bring in, please? Can we unmute Nikki, please?
Just like to say that hopefully next year Chainmakers will be... Can you hear me now?
Yes, thank you.
I'd just like to say that hopefully next year Chainmakers will be a physical event, and I'd encourage everybody to get involved and bring their friends and make it a massive event, because over the years it has grown and there have been difficulties about where we have it and all of that, but we really need to build on this today and make sure that we share it, and from that build for next year when we do hopefully have another physical event.
Okay, thank you. Sarah.
Of course, I just want to end on just a little bit of what I drafted for this event, and it was just looking at the impact of women and connecting that struggle with what we're discussing. We know that women are still disproportionately in low-paid work and jobs that can't be done from home, and research shows that mothers were nearly 50% more likely to have permanently lost their jobs or have quit since the beginning of the pandemic. And we've seen reports that lockdown has led to a significant increase in violence against women, with Refuge reporting a 10-fold increase in visits to its website. We've seen racial inequalities exposed and exacerbated. We've seen migrants being hit hard as well as cases where people aren't getting the medical help that they need. And then there's disabled people being disproportionately affected. We know austerity disproportionately affected disabled people. And now we know that around 2/3 of people who have died because of coronavirus were disabled. And of course, all of these oppressions are intimately connected to class. It's working class people who have been hit the hardest. They're on the front lines as nurses, porters and cleaners, as shop assistants, posties, delivery drivers. So it's no surprise that coronavirus deaths are twice as high in parts of the poorest, in the poorest parts of the country compared to the richest. And the effects are obviously at the most extreme at the intersections of these oppressions. So it's not just women hit the hardest, it's working class women, disabled women, Black and Asian women. And that's because capitalism discriminates, patriarchy discriminates, racism discriminates, and ableism discriminates. So what I would just say is that in response, I think collectively we need to look to the future and make sure that we don't return to this world which was already broken, and this system that really destroyed working people's lives, and that we don't fight our battles alone. So whether you're Black, Asian, disabled, whether you're LGBT, born here or a migrant, if you're working class, then we all share something in common, and that's being let down by a system that oppresses us, that stifles us, and historically has done that, and that we all benefit from tackling inequality, sharing that wealth and power, and that we're all stronger if we stand together and fight together. So the old trade union saying couldn't be more timely, that an injury to one is an injury to all, and united we stand, divided we fall. So as we move forward, that should be our guiding light, and we fight for a world that's better for working people and by working people.
Thank you, Sarah. Elena.
Right, Zara's said everything, but I just want to make two particular things because I'm come from my background is nursing, as you know. I just want to highlight the fact that we see how important public services are, and how the fact that in the austerity they were cut, and now we see the result of it in this COVID pandemic and the way that the government has tried to centralise everything, and that we can see now that privatisation does not work as a public health agenda. We can see that it doesn't. So what I would want to go forward is that for people to actually recognise now that when we were saying that private sector is not good in the public sector, that the public sector needs to be actually given the resources that it should have, that it should be put on top of the agenda, that it look what it can do and help, and could have done much better had the austerity not come in. And that's how I want to see that they actually recognise it and start doing something about it.
Thank you, Eleanor. Maureen.
Yes, I just think between Zara and Ellen, well, between everyone, most things which I would have liked to have said have been said. However, I'd just like to emphasise that we should share this video or share clips from it, and also women are going to lose their jobs, and men, and we must have the appropriate support systems in place so that we can support those people who are no longer working. I think things will get better, but we're going to find it really difficult in the short term. For those people who do lose their jobs, Unite Community is a forum that they can join. That is a part of our union that people can join and still remain and get support. So that's where I'm at. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Maureen. Sarah?
Yeah, I just think just talking, if we can just finally like close on some of the things that were going on for Mary, and kind of to round up as to why she's so important to the GMB. Mary Macarthur's mission to empower workers has so much relevance as it did over 100 years ago. The negotiations at the time when the Women Chainmakers strike happened were to regulate wages and improve the lives of workers. But throughout those negotiations, the employers complained that, and I'm just going to read it, that higher wages would make them vulnerable to foreign competition and would encourage faster modernisation and would result in job losses. Now that could be any negotiation in any workplace now, and it just shows that things haven't changed in over 100 years. And also as well that more than half of the women at the time hadn't joined a union because the weekly payment could buy a loaf of bread. It was, food poverty was a real issue for women back in 1910, and it's shocking again over 100 years that this is still an issue. We have teachers and teaching assistants providing out of their own pockets meals so children can eat. They're providing menstrual products in order for girls to be able to go and get an education and to remain in school. So women in the 21st century have swapped one set of chains for another. Almost 1 million people are on 0-hour contracts, and I know I've already spoken about people working in hospitality. We have issues such as, I know GMB have got a massive campaign running with workers in Amazon because of the appalling treatment that they suffer. I mean, we've heard stories of women who are pregnant being forced to stand for 10 hours at a time, people suffering from miscarriages, heart attacks because of the conditions that they work under. But also, as I say, the reason why Mary is so important to the GMB, the National Federation of Women Workers merged with the GMB or what was the GMB before it was known as GMB, back on the 1st of January 1921. And Mary herself was not without struggle. She'd lost her husband a few years previously, and at the age of 40, on that very day, the 1st of January 1921, she passed away from ovarian cancer. And she was set to have been our first women's officer. So I think just for the GMB, a big thank you again to all the organisers of this event, and obviously for my own officers that are involved in the region in helping put this on, and also the other events that we have for the chainmakers. And I think just to end on, to everyone that's watching today, If you're not in a union, join one. It's so easy. You can go onto the TUC website, or you can search for GMB, NEU, Unite, Unison. I know there are many out there, to find which union is best for yourself. But also to talk to people about becoming members of a union, because only by standing together will we be able to fight against cuts to terms and conditions, against bad health and safety practices. And if anyone is going out to a pub today or over the next week or so, please talk to the workers in those industries and talk to them about joining a union, because only by standing together solid, like Mary Macarthur said, as that bundle of sticks, will we be able to make sure that everyone has decent working terms and conditions. And that's all from me. Thank you, Catherine, for being a brilliant chair.
Oh, thank you. Thank you. We're now coming to the end. And firstly, I'd like to thank all of our awesome panellists. Thank you so much for your time. Zara, Eleanor, Maureen, Nikki Evans, and Nikki Downs for doing the captions, and for Sarah. Thank you so much. I would also like to thank the NEU for hosting the festival. You've done an awesome job. The Friends of the Chainmakers, I don't know where I'd have been the past few days without Jenny and Lucy. Thank you so much for your support. And a big, big thank you to the TUC Midlands and all of the unions for their ongoing support. Now, next year, we're hoping that the festival will be back at Cradley Heath, and we're hoping that you can join us then, because it will be 100 years since the death of Mary Macarthur. So we hope to see you all there next year. We're now going to end watching the victory speech by Mary Macarthur, which is spoken by Sheila Chamberlain-Hyatt, which will be then followed by a film about Lucy Woodall, the last woman chainmakers. Stay safe, and hopefully we'll see you all in person next year. Okay, take care. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Just before we put the video on, for those who have hard of hearing, this is the last time you will see the signer. So please turn subtitles on if you wish to be able to watch the video. Thank you.
Today, the 22nd of October 1910, marks the day of victory for the women chainmakers of Cradley Heath. I can now report to you that yesterday at Grangers Lane School, the vast majority of your employers have signed the whitelist, the list of manufacturers who will pay the new rates. Today you can hold your heads up high and be assured of the dignity of your worth. But to the manufacturers and employers I say this is no defeat. Indeed, this is the day on which we all move forward to a fairer, more civilised world, in which those of us with more give back to those who have little. And this struggle has not been without its sacrifices. Those women who've risked their livelihoods through their strike action, you will go down in history as the Cradley women who rose up against poverty wages for sweated labour. I sincerely hope that your story is kept alive in the Black Country and beyond for many generations to come. Women of all ages have played their parts in this victory, from the fresh-faced young girls just beginning their apprenticeships to the oldest striker of them all. 79-year-old Mrs. Patience Round. 67 years she has stood at her forge, rising at 4 a.m. each morning and finishing work as the light fades. And in her lifetime, making over 3,000 miles of chain by hand. And in all those 67 years, she has only ever taken 2 days off in a row. Let me quote you her exact words. "These are wonderful times," she said. "I never thought I should live to assert the rights of us women. But now is the time to build on your strength, women of Cradley. Unity is strength and union is strength. A trade union is like a bundle of sticks. The workers are bound together and have the strength of unity. The woman who is not in a union is like a single stick. She can be easily broken or bent to the will of her employer. Remember, an employer can do without one worker. He cannot do without them all. And this you've proved through your strike action. This is just the first step, ladies. Who knows what you can go forward and achieve as women workers? My work here is almost at an end. You no longer need a Mary Macarthur to lead you in your marches. You are finding your own leaders and your own voices. But even on this day of victory, let us remind ourselves, That which is so hard won is so easily lost. And we all know too well, a woman's work is never done. A fond farewell to you all.
Where Lucy Woodall, in 1971, still made chain, the last woman to do so.
In old little Clyde Street, Buttery, 1899. Oh, going back a year or two. When I was 13, when I left school on the Friday, I started to work on the Monday. 4 shillings a week, 7 till 7, 2 o'clock on a Saturday. Oh, and then at 2 o'clock you got your day, and then they'd expected to sweep up after that. I did 6 months at 4 shillings, and then the next 6 months I had 5 and 6. Still the same hours. That was, what, a 6 a week rise, and well, anyhow, the next 12 months, they put you on stent work. You know, you have to do so much. But when you've done that stent, if you happen to be a lucky, like gifted with it, you can do a bit, work your time out in piecework, you know. All I nearly always used to get about 2 bob and half a crown. Oh, but it was a fortune in them days. So, well, I did that for the next 12 months, and of course after your own piecework and do all sorts. I stuck it there till, won't be that, 12 months after I got my apprenticeship in, something like that. When I went from there down to down Newtown, Lizzie Perez. I worked at Lizzie Perez a good bit. I worked at, they called it Stephen Cook's, William Stevens it was. I worked there a good while. 26 in that one shop there was when I went there. That was all right as well. And then I come from there up to Mark Stevens. He was Mark Stevens, but I mean it was traded as Harry Stevens. And I stuck it there only, and I was there 35 years.
Leaving the factory by a shortcut because her arthritis makes walking any distance an arduous task, Lucy catches a bus home. A short ride through the streets of Old Hill and Cradley Heath, where she has spent all her working life. It was in this same area that she was born, and it was here that she went to school.
I went to Corngrave School. All the school was all right, really. It wasn't too bad. I seemed to be gifted with the sewing. That was the only thing. The headmistress was against me making chain. Oh, Luz, they used to say, don't go into the chain. You're gifted with a needle. I don't know, I always enjoyed my job, always been comfortable, never got a lot of money, but money don't bring happiness, does it? So when you learn, oh dear, you'll have a good many cracks, you do. Don't hold the wrist like that, pick so-and-so up. Don't do that. That's how they keep on with you know. It's never make a chain maker. As long as you got bloody stiff wrists. It's never do it. Yeah, I keep talking to you like that, you know. Still don't get through it, do you? Oh, my dad was a socket maker. My mother was a nail maker. And yet I've never seen my mother make nails, but I was a nail maker. Well, there was all nail makers then days. And then it went off the nail onto chain, didn't it? And it was all chain. Why, everywhere you went, they'd got a horse in the backyard at one time. And now, nobody left it. The only time I went on holiday was when I was up picking. You'd go up picking. Worcester. We always went to Worcester. The only time I really had holiday down there was, I should be somewhere around 24 or 5 then, I'd be. And I went down for holiday and we slept we had a house, we was in a house somewhere, I can remember that. But I know I went in pit tops to pay for me board. It was holiday money, but it was a working holiday. Still. Socks, you know, and you can do that and watch telly or whatever you want to do. I've always done that and crocheting, you know, and all that. I used to do a lot of lace at one time, but I couldn't sit to do the lace now. But I do a lot of messing there, different things, you know. And I always make me working overalls out my old dresses after they say when they wore under armholes. I can always make a front overall out the dresses. The backs are always good, you can make a front overall out of the back. Well, you have to really. You couldn't go in anything good, nor in chain, you'd burn up.